Okay, now you wanted to hear my story of my story for Duncan Williamson. Duncan Williamson who's like the godfather to all of us storytellers. I was very lucky because I did know Duncan, and I met Duncan many years ago. What a wonderful, wonderful man Duncan was. Now, he would tell a story, and I've sort of evolved it into telling this as a story of Duncan. Now, Duncan was born, a long time ago now. Actually, almost 100 years ago. He was born over in Argyllshire into a travelling family. Now, that meant they didn't live in a house. In fact, he wasn't in a house. He wasn't in a building until he went to school at 5 years old. They lived in tents. But his daddy had made a really grand tent for them. But oh dear, now he would tell this story. He would tell this story about what it was like when he was a wee lad. You see, it was the time of the Depression, and people were very poor. I mean, the poor people had very little, which meant that the travellers, there was nothing left for the travellers. So it was really about what they could find. What we now call foraging is what the children would be sent to do, to go and gather what they could find to eat, like the nettles and the berries, maybe the odd turnip from a field, maybe if they were lucky, a rabbit, or guddling for fish. And sometimes it would just be of winkles from down on the shore, just what food they could find, what they could gather. And of course they had a lot of knowledge. But times were tough, and it was Christmas time coming up. Now these wee boys and girls, Duncan had lots of brothers and sisters. They knew their mummy and daddy didn't have any money, so they weren't expecting to get any presents at Christmas time. But on Christmas morning, the daddy said, "Come here, my darlings, come here. I've got something for you." And he'd lit a fire, and all the bairns came and gathered round the fire. And there they were. And the daddy put his hand deep into his pocket of his great coat. He had a great coat that he brought back from the First World War. It was a big coat and it had deep pockets. Daddy put his hand deep down in the pocket and he brought out an orange, a big orange. Now, these bairns had never had an orange before, and they watched as the daddy peeled it, and a big spiral of orange peel. And there inside was the juicy orange, and he peeled off a wee booty, and he gave each of his bairns a bit of that orange, and he goes, "There you go, my wee darling, there you are. You sook on that, and while you're sooking on that, I've got something else for you. I've got a story." And there they were, the bairns all gathered round the fires, looking on their bit orange, listening as the daddy told a story. All these wonderful tales of princesses and flying carpets and treasure and all kinds of wonderful things. It was like going to the cinemas, going to the pictures, and they sat there chewing on their orange and listening to the stories that daddy was telling, and it was so amazing. And when the daddy finished telling the story, he said, "Now, that wee bit orange I gave you, that lasted you, 5-10 minutes? Because they made it last. But that story I told you, that story will last you the rest of your life." Because stories are like that. If it's a story that's meant for you, and if you like that story, it'll go in and become part of you. Now that wee boy Duncan, who was all ears, he'd listened to that story and he'd soaked it in, and he decided he wanted more stories. And so for the rest of his days, Duncan Williamson, listened to everybody's stories, and he went around the highlands and islands and he gathered stories. He listened to folk and he collected all these stories. Now, when he grew up and when he was an old man, when I knew him, when he was in his 80s, he had thousands of stories in his head. And it was amazing. Duncan was so amazing because he could remember every single one of those stories. And what he'd collected what Duncan had collected on his travels all around the Highlands and Islands was the treasures, the real treasures of Scotland. And they were all in Duncan's head. And we're so lucky. We're so lucky because he passed them on and he gave them to us. He gave all of us stories. He kept giving them. He says, here we are, I've got a story for you. And he'd give them away. And then his wife Linda, she collected all his stories, and David Campbell and Donald Smith, all these folk were all inspired by Duncan and his wonderful collection of stories. So we all owe him so much, and we're so grateful to him, Duncan. Duncan, bless you.